Hi, this is James Jokum, host of Webcomics Reviews and Interviews. Tonight, it's Webcomics 101, and why you should probably start running now. So sit back, relax, and let the Geek Fest begin. So, somehow or another you've got an interest in webcomics. This is all fine and good, but you may want to keep in mind that there's going to be a whole lot of pluses and minuses to the situation. This podcast is going to be looking tonight at all those individual pluses and minuses. So when you basically make the final plunge into the webcomics, you have at least a general idea what you're looking at into. Keep in mind that everybody's experience is entirely different, therefore your mileage may vary. However, there are some pretty much basics that everybody has to deal with at one time or another, so just keep in mind that these will be a general guide of what you can expect, but again, everybody's mileage varies in a lot of different ways. So, stepping into the background for a second, webcomics have been around since about the mid-1980s. Even it was really basic, just a simple illustration, and it was put around through various bulletin board systems. It wasn't until the World Wide Web of the 1990s that it really started taking off, and that's because it was probably the best and, well, in all honesty, outside of porn, probably one of the few actual entertainments available online. I mean, you still have the bulletin board systems and discussion boards, which were really starting to take off, but there was no actual real entertainment just yet. I mean, there was a lot of file sharing. However, YouTube hadn't really come along yet, and, well, a lot of the audio just took almost forever to download. So, in essence, all you really had at the time were bulletin boards. Well, webcomics sort of came in to help fill out the void. And then once webcomics came in and people started seeing all the different ways in which you could use the internet, well, obviously the webcomics sort of disappeared in the background to a certain degree. However, you do go through periods of resurgence because, well, there's a certain advantage. The biggest advantage to webcomics is that you can basically do whatever you want. I mean, there's a serious freedom of expression that just, if you want to do a quick little one-panel thing, great. If you want to do this full-blown comic book, even better. You can also take advantage of the fact that it's an infinite canvas and just all things break loose. I mean, you've had some people really get into using the fact that you've got this practically infinite area to play with that you just don't have when it comes to something that's published or other areas. And of course, there are ways to monetize the webcomics that people have figured out all sorts of weird ways to do this with. Don't worry, we'll get to a lot of them later on. For now, just realize that you can do pretty much anything you want to and go at it from there. So, I guess while we're looking at other advantages, the other advantage is that you can create your own little revenue stream. I mean, it takes a lot of work, don't get me wrong, and you're going to have to get really creative on it. But you can use webcomics to not only create a nice little revenue stream for yourself, but also help find a way to market yourself. A lot of people have used webcomics in order as a stepping stone to other careers. I mean, you've had some people actually step into actual published houses based on the strength of their webcomic. So, there is that. Unfortunately, if you're serious about doing a webcomic, it involves a lot of free labor, at least at the start. The problem, of course, will be finding collaborators, somebody to help deal with it on the comic, and of course, you're going to have to learn how to do social marketing. And last but not least is the dreaded buffer. In essence, you're going to want to put a couple webcomics ahead just to make sure something bad happens, or if you want to take a break, or 57 other reasons. So, real quick, let's explore all those. Like you knew this wasn't going to happen, right? Alright. Going back to the advantages list. Freedom of expression, marketable resume, personal income. Freedom of expression, like you said, you can do anything you want. You want to explore a genre that nobody else has explored, or mishmash 27 other genres, now's the time to try it. You want to try a particular art style, or get a lot of practice at a particular type. This is a great way to do it. I mean, nothing else, you got a lot of great feedback, especially if you use the right services. And I can't stress that feedback enough, because one of the cool things about webcomics is that it is ultimately a community, and it's one that you can take full advantage of to not just get your own word out, but also to figure out weird ways. If you're having a problem, you can probably ask somebody. That's one of the biggest advantages of a community. Admittedly, you have to do all the work yourself, but at least people are there to spur you on and say, hey, you could be doing this better, or try to not to do this that much, or, if you need feedback, you've got it. It's just a matter of figuring out where to go to find the best feedback on it. For some people, creating a marketable resume is just cool in and of itself. Admittedly, you have to work a little bit on the web design and make things, because there's a lot of really great sites out there for webcomics, but they tend to be a little on the kludgy side. That is, they tend to be really basic, and admittedly, there's some really great sites out there. In fact, it's really easy to find them. You want to try to avoid the real simple ones. Of course, there is sort of a plus minus on there. What I'm talking about is that you have some web comic community sites like Drunk Duck or Spider Forest, where you can go to and get some sign up, and you got the advantage of all the marketing that site has. Unfortunately, you also have to be exclusive to that site, and you have to deal with any limitations that are also dealing with that site. A lot of times this means you have to do a lot of extra coding. In other words, you have to set up the site yourself and throw on their specific buttons as well as other information in order to be ranked and all that. Others, it's a little bit more Wild West out there, and even though you've got a lot of your own personal freedom, well, when it comes to doing your own website, personal freedom is not necessarily a good thing. I mean, if you're willing to put in the time and learn how to code, great. Otherwise, you're going to come up with something really horrible. I mean, not only will it be stripped down and really basic, but it's just not going to look right. So there's always that consideration, is before you sign up for a community, always check it out and see what all kind of support you have. But once you sign up for the community, the cool thing is that you've got all this potential feedback and, like I said, all this potential help if you need it. After all, the community as a whole wants to succeed, and that means they have to help everybody else in that group succeed as well. So, if you're going to do webcomics, try to become part of the community, because you get that little bit extra boost and all that. But the cool thing is that you also get to do pretty much whatever you want. I mean, even the community has certain rules and regulations about the material that they prefer not to see. You do have a lot of really cool lack of limitations otherwise. So that allows you to try pretty much anything you'd ever want to try. And yeah, this means if you want to try a little something on the risque or erotic side, hey, you're welcome to do that as well. You can do that just as much as you can do an all ages comic. So, in short, you can have as much support or as much background as you can possibly get your hands on. You've also got this really cool thing called a marketable resume. The webcomic allows you to demonstrate what you can, to a certain degree you can't do. For those of you who are really into trying experimental things, this can be a major plus. On the other hand, if all you're trying to do is get into another big publishing company, it allows you to demonstrate that not only can you keep a schedule, but you can also have a consistent style of art, even though once in a while you'll have a little bit of fun. I mean, it's really cool to, have like 20 strips all of the same art style and graphic style, and then break off into a quick little arc of 5 to 10 comics where you just simply go crazy. That's all on you. But the bottom line here is that by taking advantage of the webcomic and having a little bit of fun with it, you have what's called, a marketable resume. That is, you're going through and creating a resume that actually is proof of concept of what you can and can't do. And usually that's not really a bad thing, especially if you're trying to establish yourself as an artist. If you're trying to establish yourself as a writer, admittedly things get a little bit more interesting. But in that case, you're going to want to try to work with different artists. But that can be a problem in and of itself. And of course, you can also set up a potential income. For a lot of webcomickers, there's the real basic, you sell advertising on your space. Others will set up with some sort of print-on-demand service in order to, create books and other merchandise. And of course, you can always do a PayPal donation button or something equivalent that will help, go straight to your funds. Stepping back for a sec, print on demand is replacing what they used to call a vanity press. That is, you basically go to a vanity publisher, have them do up a couple hundred copies of your book, and then do whatever you wanted to with those issues or those volumes. Well, the modern version, the internet-based version, is print on demand, POD. You expect to hear me say that a lot. What basically happens is that a person will get interested in somebody's book online and will want either a digital or a physical copy. Well, if they want just the straight electronic version, that can be downloaded straight to their hard drive, no problem, or phone, or tablet, or other device. Again, it's just straight bits. It can be downloaded wherever you want to. However, it gets the name print on demand because instead of having a whole lot of things in the background, in other words, instead of you having to lug around a couple thousand books for whoever wants them at any time, what the POD publisher will do is print those books up on whenever they're requested. And then we'll ship that to the individual persons for you. In other words, all you have to do is set up the electronic file, usually a PDF, order one copy for yourself, just basically as a proof copy, just to go through and make sure it looks fine, and then you're good to go. The two best services for this are Lulu.com and Kablam.com. Look them up, they're really good services. But you can also set up through sites like Etsy or half a dozen other sites if you want to do other stuff like prints or toys or other stuff based off your comics. In other words, there's a lot of really cool merch possibilities depending on what you're willing to go through and what you're willing to do yourself. You can take advantage of other kinds of print-on-demand services like Zazzle or Cafe Press that will put your branding on various different types of products. And this runs the full gamut from t-shirts, calendars, magnets. There's even a couple of sites out there that will even do plushies and card games for you. So it's just a matter of figuring out what kind of merch you want to do and going for it. Obviously, if you market this well and the webcomic takes off, this will translate into some serious revenue. Don't expect a whole lot, however. Generally speaking, very few webcomicers can do more than pay the rent. Most people, if they're lucky, will get enough for like a pizza or two for a month. So here's where it's going to depend on how much marketing you end up doing for your thing. But the bottom line is, you've got some serious freedom of expression because you can do pretty much anything you want. You can turn this into a resume for something else. And you can also be able to make this into a potential income source. So that's not necessarily a bad thing. However, there are the frustrations. And trust me, there's going to be lots of them. The biggest initial problem will be looking for a collaborator. Not everybody can do writing and illustration. It's just an entirely different mindset. So generally you'll find somebody who's really good at writing and somebody who's really good at doing the art, but usually not somebody who can do both. I mean, there are exceptions, and you usually tend to find them doing the 4-panel strips. So, you really want to debate if you're going to do something serious. You really want to debate if you want to do it alone. Generally speaking, you don't, but in order to find a collaborator, you have to go through so much, and especially if you're a writer, because right now, a lot of the illustrators are pretty much tired of doing things just for exposure. So if the one thing you've got going for you is just for exposure, don't even bother. Unless you've got one really, really cool idea. And by really, really cool idea, this is not something you just think is a really cool idea, but something you've had other people mention. So, it can happen. It can happen, especially if you can have some way of bringing in and paying the artist right off the bat. So, but 9 times out of 10, most webcomics have a problem just finding people to get together and do it in the first place. So keep that in mind. If you're a writer, you may want to take a good couple of semesters of art classes. And there's no way I can recommend that more, even if you're not interested in ultimately drawing yourself. Something to keep in mind here is that your webcomic doesn't necessarily have to be ultra high art in order to succeed. I keep emphasizing 4-panel comics. That's because when most people think that, well, look at the newspaper columns and all that. You're not talking. You have to do ultra realistic, ultra detailed art, just something that gets a general picture across. If you're doing something humorous, even better, because that means you don't, the detail isn't necessarily mandatory. And for that matter, even if you're doing something serious, you can generally pull off a really simple art style. It just depends on what you're trying to pull off. So, again, if you're a writer, you may want to just worry more about taking art classes. Because trust me, if you're an artist, I hate using the analogy, but it's sort of like a woman at a bar. You're the guy, a writer's a guy, artists are the women. If artist wants to go home with somebody, they're going home with somebody. There's not a question in that. It's just a matter of finding the right person to link up with. Writers, once you get going, you're also going to want to keep up a buffer, which can get frustrating in and of itself. You usually want to keep a good 2 to 3 week buffer, which can mean anywhere from just a couple of comics to, as many as 21, 30. You want to basically be ahead enough that if something happens to interrupt the flow, you're good to go. Or if you want to basically do a whole lot of comics in one fell swoop, hey, you're good to go. You want to take a vacation, something bad happens, all you're doing is covering yourself. Unfortunately, maintaining that buffer can be a source of frustration in and of itself, especially there at the beginning. So keep that in mind. You're also going to have to learn how to do social marketing. In order to become any kind of success, you're going to have to get the word out, and that means bugging people. That means posting every so often on Facebook, Twitter, you name it. You know, you're going to be a big fan on Pinterest, and heaven knows you may even learn how to do Instagram. These are all not bad ways of getting the word out. But you're going to have to become a master of social marketing. If this means happening to find a huge number of comics groups to subscribe to, just so that every so often you can advertise your comic, great. Keep in mind, one of the problems with being in the comics group is they don't always encourage advertising. Once in a while, you'll come across a group that's just there to talk about basic topics or how to accomplish things. While this is a really cool part of the community, it's not so great for if you're doing advertising. So keep that in mind. There's also going to be the free labor part, especially there at the beginning. All this is looking at is that you're part of the thing until you actually start getting an income flow happening. It's going to be a work of love. There's just no getting around that. You're going to be putting hours every week trying to figure out 37 ways how to pull stuff off. And even if you've got a really great website where you know the community is incredible, the work is still going to come down on you. You know, that onus is going to be depending on what you do. So that's something to consider, is that there is going to be a lot of free labor involved, especially at the beginning. I mean, and we're not just talking in terms of doing the comic in and of itself. Even if you got a community that does all the web design for you, you're still going to be looking at doing basic maintenance every so often. You're going to have to decide which comics go into the archive and which ones don't. This is not always an easy decision. Or for that matter, how you're going to organize your archives. And again, you're going to be doing a lot of social marketing, so there's also that to be considered as well, and so on and so forth. There's a lot of work involved, so keep that in mind, especially if you're going to, especially if you've already got a full-time job, and or if you're a student, especially if you're a student. So, just those little things to keep in mind. However, once you get your webcomic up and going, and you're dealing with all the frustrations, and trust me, I've seen people go from solid black hair to solid gray. The artist's life is not always as easy and glamorous as people seem to make it out to be. If somebody tells you that being an artist is 100% glamour, yeah, you need to shoot these people and go on. These people are idiots. There's being an artist, even a writer, is not necessarily as much fun as people think. There's a lot of stress, a lot of locking yourself into a studio away from things, and just simply doing it. So, and on top of that, if we're looking at the writers, well, it's really hard to communicate what you do as a writer, even if everybody knows it. Go figure, right? You just don't have anything physical to demonstrate. Whereas if you're an illustrator, you're going to have somebody who has something there and is, can actually go, hey, this is what I've done, and can actually show people. Because nothing is more boring than looking at a script. Looking at beautiful drawings, great. People can go all day and look at beautiful paintings. So looking at really great webcomic panels, pretty much just the same, as long as they're actually interesting. The only problem is, people don't really care all that much about the words unless they actually get into it. So being a writer sort of sucks. There's a reason writers are considered pretty much the basics of the industry, but not really all that important. And I'm not trying to come down on art writers. I'm pretty much a writer myself, keep in mind. I'm just trying to point out that if you're expecting this really cool, glamorous life because I can be called an artist, writers really aren't considered artists in their own right, which sort of sucks. So keep that in mind. You've got all the passion and usually nothing to show for it unless you're really, really good. So if you're coming into this for the chicks, yeah, this is not the field for you. For that matter, if you're coming into it for the money, really debate that one. So, but when it comes to the money part, hey, there's all sorts of possibilities. Let's look real quick at one of the biggest communities out there, Drunk Duck. Which I think now is going by the Duck Comics, or Duck Webcomics. Originally, when it was set up, it was just set up as a big, huge webcomic. That was the major innovation it had, was that it would allow you to rate your comic relative to everybody else. This allowed you all sorts of pluses and minuses. There's usually, a couple of minuses when you're big and famous, is that you're going to get mimicked and somebody might steal your thunder. But if you're one of the top dogs, that is your top ranked comic, you get all the clicks. That is, you get all the visitors coming in and saying hi and looking at your comic. And of course that means that in this case, success tends to become an avalanche. As long as you can put something out that people like, you'll always be good to go. The only problem, of course, is getting up there in the first place. But if you do get up there, well, Drunk Duck, even though currently I believe it now belongs to a company called Wowio, did belong to a company called Platinum Studios, which, if you're into movies, put out movies like Dylan Dog and Cowboys and Aliens. That is, there's an actual possibility that your webcomic could actually go from just a simple digital version, possibly to a printed version, and then to a movie version. And of course, once you hit that movie version, usually no matter how bad it is, it's a really cool thing to put on your resume. So, when we started looking at Drunk Duck, there was always a possibility of people actually seeing those webcomics in movies, even though I don't think there were really a whole lot of them. So, however, the advantage to being on Drunk Duck, especially if you got to be one of the more popular comics, is that you can then sell the space on the comic and make money that way. Everybody does that, sells by advertising and sponsors and other things. And, well, that's how you do it with a webcomic. You can also throw up links to other sites that you're doing. For example, if you've compiled all your comics, you can actually put them into a PDF and throw them at a print-on-demand printer. If you're really good, you can set up you can obviously do some sort of crowdsourcing like Kickstarter or Indiegogo. Yeah, I know I'm throwing a lot of links out there, but the advantage of having this crowdsourcing going is that at that point, rather than just simply having people buy your stuff through the print on demand, what you can then do is not only sell off a couple thousand comic books at the same time, but also create a reserve so you can actually buy books for yourself and then go to convention to sell these books. Obviously, I'm willing to point out that, make sure you've got some really good shipping, or you've got a way to ship it to the convention. And if you are going to ship it to a convention, how to take those books back. because once those books are printed off, they're yours. And, well, you know, a 100-page book is roughly about £1. So when you see somebody who's doing like 2,000 books, that's a literal ton of books. And if they don't sell, you're going to have to figure out a way how to store them. Luckily, you can donate them to libraries, try to sell them up to local comic book shops, so on and so forth. So there is that. But, you know, part of the whole comic book thing is when you're successful, you start doing crowdsourcing and getting those reserve books set up. So that's always a serious plus. There used to be a service called Project Wonderful, which was really sweet. Originally, it was set up, in fact, for webcomics, even though it took off and was all for all sorts of minor sites like blogs, that sort of thing. What this enabled you to do was to find advertisers and then trade off whatever credits you earned into and invested in other advertising. So, in other words, your advertising on your site could lead to advertising on other sites. Major cool advantage in and of itself, because that meant that the more popular your site was, the more popular you can make it elsewhere. And if you run a community as well, you not only had your marketing going for it, but you also had the community's marketing going for you. And so you'd be getting a huge number. You could potentially be getting, a couple million hits a week. And of course that translates into other things. So, remember what I said about that potential income? This is sort of what I'm talking about now. The only problem, of course, is that you have to get your hits up there in the first place. So, I guess sort of backing up this deck, keep in mind you can also take advantage of other sites and not just have comic books going. You can also put your stuff on merchandise. In other words, you want the calendar for your comic book? No problem. This can be done. T-shirts? Easy. Stickers, magnets, coffee cups? It just depends on the site. You're going to have to experiment a little bit. Two I'll submit right off the bat would be Cafe Press and Zazzle. Mainly because they have a wide range of potential merchandise that you can do all for yourself. If you're really creative and you don't mind doing more interesting stuff, and trust me, this gets really cool really quick, you can set up your own fashion line. Some people have actually done their own stuffed animals based on their comic. And there are ways to actually find people to do this kind of stuff for you. If you're really having fun and you have a wide range of characters, you can also set up a collectible card game. And again, you can print those decks off yourself for your own purposes, or again, you can go POD. So there's a whole lot of potential as far as making an income from this. You just have to make sure that the product you're setting up in the first place is pretty good. And it's also backed by one heck of a marketing campaign. But the quality is the key word here. And here's sort of the big bad version of this. No matter how, if your comic isn't at least decent quality, it's not going to become a success. I mean, you've got these people that tend to think that any comic will do well. It just has to do okay. It has to look okay. They've got this whole cynical thing going for them that they think that it's really easy to do a webcomic and therefore to market it out. Well, that's not the case. And here's sort of the biggest part you've really got to seriously debate on this. Can your webcomic actually sustain itself in terms of quality for more than 5 or 10 strips. That is, it is something that's potentially long term. And this is where it sort of helps to have somebody outside that you trust their opinion on. You know, the standard the standard cliche of try to avoid friendly really applies here, because you're way too many friends and family that will tell you whatever they want you to hear just to keep you up. You know, they think that their goal is to be your cheerleader, and sometimes that works against you. When it comes to anything artistic, that's definitely the case. Especially if you've got a really highly supportive mother who will, okay everything you do. It's not going to work that well for you later on. In all honesty, if you as an artist, especially a writer, don't have a thick skin, you're going to need to develop one. You're going to need to learn how to take criticism, even worse criticism out there. I mean, you've got all these people that are like taking all these criticisms that are like racist and all that, and you've got to remember that kind of stuff, even though it's going to drag you down eventually, it's got to start hitting you like water off a duck's back. If it was legitimate constructive criticism, hey, listen to it. But if it's the kind of criticism that's just toxic, if they go after your race, your sex, your gender, whatever, they're just random trolls trying to bring you down. Trust me, they can't. It's going to be up to you to develop some sort of thick skin in order to deal with this. And straight up, as a writer, if you're not used to dealing with rejection, 9 times out of 10, you're not much of a writer. Yeah, you heard it. If you're not into rejection, don't even become a writer in the first place, because some writers, that's all they deal with. I mean, you've got some incredible success stories based off of 30, 40, 50, rejections. Heck, and I'm not, it's just, you've got people like even Mark Twain and J.K. Rowling who've had to deal with rejection a lot. So, if you're a writer and you're not into just keeping into it, no matter what, no matter how badly you get rejected, you're going to find out really quick how bad that can be. All I can say is stick to it and see what happens. I mean, with an illustrator, at least, like I said, they're basically the women at the bar. An illustrator can generally always find something. And even if they don't, well, usually have enough confidence in what they do, that doesn't really matter. So, not saying that we don't have some thin-skinned artists out there, or that illustrators shouldn't develop their own thick skins. But you as a writer really need to develop a thick skin, and the thicker the better. I mean, we're talking plate mail ballistic armor type stuff. Just be aware that you're going to be dealing with a lot of criticism, and not all of it's good. Some of it can be downright toxic, and some of it, if you listen to it way too much, will make you go suicidal. I mean, just look at what happened with the guy who played Jar Jar Binks. The guy would, basically felt like he was drummed out of, all the actor circles, and he wasn't getting a new job because of how badly he got nailed for being Jar Jar Binks. So, sorry, I can't. You need to keep realizing that you're going to be dealing with criticism. And you're going to have to figure out a way to discern real criticism, real constructive criticism, from the fake people who want to tear you down. And you're going to need to learn how to listen to the people who want to build you up, or at least, give you honest, constructive criticism on how to make your comic better. And in some cases, yeah, you probably shouldn't be doing a webcomic, and it'll become pretty quick. So, only if you're willing to put up with all the toxic criticism should you even consider being a webcomic person in the first place. But, and hopefully I haven't belabored that point way too much. So, if you can find somebody who's willing to help you, who's willing to say, hey, this is what you're doing right, this is what you're doing wrong, do more of this, less of that, and is willing to show you a lot of the really cool stuff, hey, go for it. Do whatever it takes to build that relationship with that person. And more importantly, when that person tells you, hey, you're screwing up, this is bad, don't do this, pay attention to what that person is saying. Yeah, sometimes that person is going to be wrong. But the person is going to be right enough that, like I said, at least listen to the person. So, where are we? Here we are. If you don't mind putting up with a lot of ridiculous stuff, and I'm not just talking the criticism is a major issue, but you're also going to need to set up a buffer, you're also going to need to become a master at social marketing, you're going to have to deal with a certain amount of free labor, especially at the beginning, and you're going to have problems finding a collaborator. If you don't mind dealing with those, and trust me, they can be strenuous in and of themselves, hey, go for it. If you're having problems finding a collaborator, like I said, learn how to draw yourself. There's a lot of books, a lot of classes. You can do this online. You can take a cheap class in the community. From what I understand, a lot of states are seriously starting to debate having the first 2 years of college free, or having some access to college for free for the first couple of years. If you can find something like that, take advantage of it. Get a major in whatever you want to major in, and at the same time, take a couple of classes and throw them into art and writing. Especially some drawing classes. Also, graphic design classes while you're at it. I cannot recommend graphic design enough. You have how many artists are doing some really incredible stuff, but the composition is way off. Or the color palette's way off. Both of these fall into graphic design stuff. If you don't know what the rule of thirds is, you need to seriously look it up. And while you're at it, take a couple of acting classes. Especially if you're a writer. That helps you get into characters. And of course, I can't stress taking film classes. You tend to learn a lot of really cool stuff in those film classes that applies to a lot of different art. The rule of 180 is incredible when it comes to doing conversations, for example. You don't know what it is? Hey, time to look it up, right? But if you don't mind dealing with all that kind of stuff, well, you've got one heck of an avenue for freedom of expression. You can do pretty much anything you want. You don't have to limit yourself to just an 8.5 by 10 inch panel. You want to take as much room and just go crazy? No problem. You want to throw a little bit of animation in there through GIFs? No problem. So on and so forth. There's a lot of room for personal expression when it comes to webcomics. For those trying to set up their own little portfolios, the webcomic sets itself up as a marketable resume. That is, it's proof to other people that they can easily reference. They don't have to go to, a corporate office to figure out what you've been up to. You just give them the URL and let them play. It becomes a really great little resume for future projects. And as I pointed out, there's also a lot of potential income. So just keep in mind a lot of this, and you should be fine. Just have some fun with it. Go for it. So, you were still into sticking around and doing webcomics? Cool. You want to find out a lot more about it? Even better. you'll be hearing a lot more from me and how to pull a lot of this stuff off. If, on the other hand, I've accidentally scared you away, well, that happened too. So, bottom line, if you're sticking with it, let's go for it. I'll see you guys next week. Have a good evening.